Welcome back to another episode of Eli the Computer Guy's After School Special as we continue to talk about our Greta Thunberg AI, or as we call it here at Silicon Dojo, GAI. And the question that a lot of people are asking is, Eli, will GAI take my coding job? So if the question is, will an AI that's developed off the immense brain power of Greta Thunberg take your job? The answer is obviously not. We all know the most powerful force in the entire universe is a young woman waving her finger at the world saying, "How dare you?" Picking up a hammer or a screwdriver or any of that kind of stuff probably isn't going to happen. If we talk about artificial intelligence in general, though, and we ask the question of will artificial intelligence take people's coding jobs, the answer gets to be a lot more nuanced. And honestly, as with most conversations that come up whenever we're talking about artificial intelligence, it has more to do with the overall technology industry than AI. Again, one of the things that I really want to hammer into your head is that AI is simply functionality. Artificial intelligence, again, let's put that in quotes, but quote unquote, artificial intelligence is simply one component of a much larger project, of a much larger solution. So one of the questions that has to be asked when you start saying, will AI take my job? Really the question is will developments in technology take your job? And will AI just happen to speed that along? So the funny thing is, right, when we're thinking about artificial intelligence and we think about artificial intelligence destroying the jobs of coders, one of the things that really gets missed out on this concept is how many jobs have simply been destroyed over the past couple of decades simply because things have improved. Again, when I started in the corporate world, I literally had to support Windows 95 in a production environment. And let me tell you, Windows 95 and production should never go together. We would have machines that would just blue screen of death and that would just commit suicide just because back in the day. Literally, we had a big problem. So there was no security policies on Windows 95. That was something that was going to come a couple years later. There's no security policies, right? So basically, you created a user account, and that user account could do absolutely anything. So you would give this nice, beautiful computer that you had just taken a couple of hours to rebuild to a secretary, and you tell that secretary, okay, all you can use is the Oracle database and the Outlook and the normal internet services, and that is it. You are not allowed to install anything else onto your computer. And they would nod at you, and then 4 hours later, their computer would be dead because they had to download the dancing baby. So there was a dancing baby. I have PTSD from Dancing Baby. It wasn't just a dancing baby, there was dancing everythings. There was a dancing baby, there was dance of hula girls, there's all kinds of dancey things. Anyways, right, this was back when computers were really new, so it didn't take a lot to entertain folks. And so basically people would download these little apps, and it would have like these little dancing babies that would like dance, or hula people that would dance across the screen, right? And so you'd be sitting there, and you'd be doing your boring ass secretarial work, and you could see a dancing baby. That's right. That's what made Gen X people smile back in the days. The problem was we were dealing with computers that many times had 16 megs of RAM. We were talking about megs of RAM back in that era. So 16, maybe 32, maybe 48, right? Again, a lot of these computers did not even get above 100 megs of RAM for a long time. And so the problem is when you have a little dancing baby doing his little dancing baby thing, that actually required quite a bit of RAM. And so the entire computer would crash because you'd have things like memory leaks. And, the people that designed the Dancing Baby applications didn't worry about IT professionals having to support these computers. And it was all hell. Again, like it was like with AOL. So AOL, America Online, for those folks that don't remember the word AOL. Anyways, AIM. AIM was like the first. It was called AOL Instant Messenger. AIM was like the first social media company. Really, it's kind of surprised that it doesn't exist anymore. Again, it's one of those surprising things. Who would have thought AIM would have died? But it did. Anyways, We'd have a lot of employees that would want AIM, so they had AIM at home, and so they wanted to be able to chat with their friends while they're at work. Hey, I'm getting paid a salary. Why shouldn't I be chatting with my friends too? Anyways, that's the argument for management. That argument I didn't really care about. What I did care about is AOL decided to do a very non-competitive thing back then, which basically meant that if you installed AOL onto a computer, any computer, it would disable every other network connection on that computer and only allow access to a dial-up AOL account. So basically, you have this computer on the LAN, right, on the local area network. They would install AOL because there were no security permissions. Anybody could do anything they wanted onto these computers. They would install AOL. As soon as AOL was installed, then all of a sudden, the LAN connection would get disabled, and then I would get a work order. And the thing was with that kind of work is it was a big pain in the ass, and it really sucked, and it was really stupid, and there were ways to really prevent this type of problem from happening. But the funny thing nobody ever talks about is for IT support professionals is that that's actually what gave us hours. That is what got us to be able to be paid, right? All of these stupid configuration issues, all of these things that you could do to destroy your computer, those were problems that the computer would have, and then you'd have to call an IT professional to come in and, remove the dancing babies and remove AOL and do all of that kind of stuff, right? The interesting thing is as time went by, right, Windows XP was a complete and utter disaster. Windows XP up to Service Pack 1, you could literally drop registry edits directly onto a computer from a website. You go to a website, it could drop a registry edit onto your computer. Didn't even tell you it had happened. Complete and utter disaster. Once they came out with Service Pack 2, things got a little bit better. Vista on its own was a disaster, but Windows 7 got better. Windows 10 is a lot better than things used to be. And one of the things a lot of folks don't think about is that as we had all of these improvements to infrastructure, right, that you did not need as many IT support professionals anymore. I think about this with something called quality of service, QoS. So QoS is basically how you prioritize packets on a network, right? So if you have a network, a local area network with limited bandwidth, right, certain packets should have priority. Real-time communication packets should have priority. FTP email packets should have less priority, right? If you have a limited amount of bandwidth, you want to make sure voice over IP calls get the bandwidth that they need, and FTP will get, what are the dribs and drabs, just so it can get done, right? An interesting thing that I heard a professional talk about, again, this was about 10 years ago when he was talking about quality of service, is that basically the whole entire concept of quality of service was that you had crap hardware. Somebody asked the person, was like, well, with the whole quality service configurations, how would you do it? And he basically looked at the person and said, I'd buy a better switch. Again, this was back when you had gigabit switches, and so gigabit switches were enough for most of what everybody needs. Now you get 10 gigabit switches and maybe 100 gigabit switches if you really have the money for it. But that was basically the thing. It was like, well, you can either sit there and muck around with all this packet prioritization and quality of service, or you can just buy a better switch. When you look at how much IT professionals cost, buying better networking equipment at the end of the day will be much cheaper and will provide you far better service than having your network technicians run around and try to prioritize all of these kinds of packets, right? And the interesting thing there is, again, you think about the world going from Windows 95, and you think of the world, with the converged networks and quality of service and network prioritization as equipment got better and better and better and better and better and better and better. The fact of the matter is, you need fewer IT professionals, right? Simply because things functionally got better. I was at Interop, New York. So Interop, New York, probably about the 2012 timeframe. And one of the interesting things that I saw there, so they had the keynote speaker and was talking about all the new management consoles and management things that their company was using. One of the most interesting things back then, again, this was back in 2012, is the person literally got up there and said, look, I'm the CIO of this company, blah, blah, blah. We have been able to quadruple. We have increased our employee headcount by 4x and reduced our IT support staff by a quarter. They literally laid off or fired 25% of their IT support staff at the exact same time they quadrupled their headcount. And the reason is because software and equipment and everything had become so much better over that past decade that they now no longer needed as many support people in order to provide the services that were previously required. Again, you look at it now, whether you're talking about Ansible, I guess everybody nowadays uses Ansible, but Puppet or Chef, any any of these kinds of automated management systems is what's really interesting is you can now literally have one administrator manage 1,000 servers. Again, think about this. When I got my MCSE 2000 for NT 4.0, got a 99 2000. If you wanted to manage an NT server, you sat down on the NT server and you right-clicked and you left-clicked and you did all that kind of stuff, right? Literally, when I got my MCSE, they would test you on did you know how to right-click, left-click all the way down? Did you know like 5 levels down in configuration panels to know what you had to do, right? But now, again, like with Ansible and that kind of thing, with scripted commands, you can just fire up. You can just simply say, I want all of these servers updated. And it will just update all of those servers. I want, Nginx or whatever on all of these servers, and it will just simply do that. I need all these servers to have these configurations, and it just simply goes out there, right? With Ansible and that type of thing, the amount of systems that an IT professional or a DevOps professional at this point in time can administer is just so much more. Beyond that, when we start looking at going to the cloud, right? We talk about credit card upgrade. So back in the day, right, if I have my server has its amazing 32 gigs of RAM. Oh yeah, 32, man. Right, it has 32 gigs of RAM. It has its 10 gig hard drive or whatever else, its power supply. Well, one of the interesting things is back then, right, if you ran out of space, right, if you ran out of resources on that server, you had to do a lot, right? Hopefully, you could actually upgrade past 16 megs of RAM. You might not be able to, but there was a lot that went in to doing an upgrade. You had to tell everybody you're shutting the system down. You had to make sure there was a final replication that was done, PDC, BDC, if you know what the hell those things are. And then you would shut it down, then you'd slide everything in, then you spin it back up, and you cross your fingers that nobody had put a frickin' Dancy baby on the server. That did happen every once in a while. Anyways, right, there was a lot of work that went into that. Think about AWS, though. AWS, Azure, Linode, DigitalOcean. Right, if you have a server now up in their cloud, and right now it has 4 gigs of RAM, and now you need to upgrade it to 16 gigs of RAM, or it has X amount of storage, and you need to upgrade it to Y amount of storage. Basically, what do? You go into the configuration panel, you say what resources you want, you hit apply, you now have those resources. How much time did it take to upgrade a server back in the day versus how much time does it take to upgrade a server in the modern world? And so that's one of the things is if you look is that the old world of IT support is dead. I've done many videos talking about IT is dead. And again, the IT that I came up with is in fact dead. And if it's not dead at this point, somebody should really take it out back and put a bullet into it, right? Because again, doing technology the way that we used to do 10 years ago literally doesn't make an ounce of sense. Things have transitioned into kind of this programmatic administrative world. Even things where you can put configurations up onto GitHub or whatever, and you actually now use configurations in the programming world, basically to do the sysadmin type task. Again, if you're going to be uploading things, managing stuff like that, right? The old way of doing things has in fact died. And it's probably a good thing for everybody, right? So you think about that, right? You think about that, and then you look at the world of programming, right? Programming has changed massively. One of the reasons I was not a programmer 20 years ago is because programming 20 years ago is not like programming today. It's funny, right? I get these young people, they're like, Eli, when you were a kid, did you want to be a computer guy? And I was like, no, man, no. You never had to use a wang. I remember when my daddy would take me to work, and then he'd force me to touch his wang. That's actually a joke. It's a joke. There were these things called wangs. There were wangs. There were blue screens. My father was a PhD safety engineer for the government, and so when I needed to tippy-tap out a report back when I was in grade school, he would take me into work, into a room with all these fluorescent lights, and I'd sit there in front of this green screen and play with his wang. It was, yeah, not what I would call exciting. I had friends of mine that were coders in high school. And yeah, it was kind of lame. I mean, come on now, coding for the Apple IIe. Ooh. Wow, look at those graphics on Oregon Trail. Blow your mind. Oh my God, Oregon Trail in color. Anyways, right, the thing is, programming has changed a lot over time. Again, even if you go back to 2000, most of the people that were doing programming, again, if you wanted to build things, oh, like QuickBooks, or if you wanted to build an operating system, or if you wanted to basically build desktop applications, that type of thing, you would go into programming. But there wasn't very good distribution systems back at the time. Again, the internet had finally come out, but remember, we were at 56K connections for a lot of that. So like if you were home, like one of the biggest problems we had back then is people would share cartoons, like they would scan. Remember scanners, flatbed scanners were the thing. So anyways, they would flatbed scan a cartoon, and then they would like group email it out, and it would be like 1 meg, man. It would be like 1 meg. And so you had a POP3 connection, which is a protocol for email. And so with POP3, you sequentially download. So you download the first email, then the second email, the third email, the fourth email. And so you don't skip around. It goes in order. And so the problem is you have these jackasses that would email out these email blasts, and they'd be sending you 1 or even 3 meg files that on a 56K connection would take sometimes 5 or 10 minutes just to be able to download one of those things. And then you learned who to hate. Who to really, 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 really hate, right? So anyways, you think about it, even if you are going to build applications, there's a big question of, again, how you're going to distribute it and the whole 9 yards. If you look at how technology has come, again, the amount of things that you can now do in browsers is absolutely amazing. Again, if you look at the JavaScript API or the HTML5 JavaScript API, it is amazing what a web browser can do with a teeny tiny, just infinitesimal amount of code, whether it's storage, whether it's dealing with the buzzers, whether it's getting geolocation from the GPS, whether it's being able to interact with a tremendous amount of hardware on your smartphone. You can literally do that with a JavaScript API call with like anywhere between like 2 to 5 lines of code. You get the power that didn't exist, even 20 years ago. And so one of the interesting things to think about, like with the programming world, is how we use programming nowadays, and what people do with programming is tremendously different than, again, it was 20 years ago. And so one of the big questions that has to be asked is, as things get easier and easier and easier with programming, is coding going to die because of AI? Or is coding going to slowly go downhill because we are improving the systems for being able to create and deploy code in such a way that we simply will not need as many programmers going into the future? I think about this with my career, right? So I've been an IT professional for over 20 years now. I started in the U.S. Army back in 1996, got my MCSE and NT4 in 2000, got 100 hours of Definity, PBX, and Audix administration certifications back in the day. Dealt with websites and PHP and digital surveillance systems, had my own consulting company, and now I'm sitting here teaching folks how to do AI with Python or whatever, basically on $50 little computers. One of the things I really want you to think about, though, is that how much my skill set and my career has changed over 20 some odd years, right? Back in 1996, when I was sitting there in BDUs in the Army, I was learning how to basically repair gray and brown boxes. Like literally. Literally, that was how exciting back then. We would just get boxes for a week. Like every week, we would get certified on a different box. Most of the time, we weren't even sure what the box really did. We're not even sure what the box got inserted into. We just knew how to put the box on the stand, how to go through the troubleshooting routine, and then how to pull out the card or do the repair or whatever else, right? It was in electronics that we were dealing with. Again, soldering, oscilloscopes, that type of deal. The interesting thing about that, though, even in 1996, is the MOS that I was in the year before had actually been 2 MOSs. It had been a 29-week MOS and a 31-week MOS. So 2 entirely different job skills with almost 30 weeks of training for each job skill. Basically, they combined both of those job skills into one job skill, the MOS that I was in, that required 33 weeks of training. So 2 additional weeks of training And we got qualified on everything, 29 additional hours, right? Basically, that's how things were consolidating at that time. A year after I graduated from that MOS program, they had consolidated a couple of other MOSs into that MOS program because the fact of the matter was, even in the 90s, technology was becoming so reusable, it was becoming so durable, stable, the whole nine yards, that even the Army didn't need to have all of these different specific specialties from their soldiers. They could simply keep combining all of those specialties into one single program and get soldiers out that were able to do the work that was required, right? And that's how I was in the Army. Then again, like I say, I go off, I get my MCSE in 2000, I go into the corporate world, I'm dealing with the VIA systems. And basically these were digital and analog telephone systems, Definity, they're called Definity, if you know what the hell a Definity box is. So these Definity boxes, we use something called Jedi. Yes, I used the Jedi. It's called GEDI. You go in there and you configure hunt groups and call paths and all of that kind of stuff, right? And even in a short period of time, things had changed pretty quickly with how communication was done. Again, we get broadband in the world, then we get a huge new revolution. Then we get mobile into the world, we get another massive revolution. And if you look at the world of technology in the 2020s versus the 1990s, it is an entirely different world that requires an entirely different skill set. The skill set that I spent years of my life getting certified for 20 years ago is, basically worth a story over a couple of beers at this point. God help me if I actually run into a Definity system or an NT4 system, right? And one of the interesting parts, though, again, this is one of the things that I find fascinating about the coding world, right, is we have so many new people into the coding world. And one of the things psychologically people think is like however things currently are is how they will always be. Right? We have lived experiences. Once you go through lived experience, once you see telephone system administrators being kicked out on their asses. Again, back when we had the digital to VoIP transition in the telephone system world, it was brutal. I saw six-figure telephone system administrators literally get their asses kicked out the door. And the fact of the matter is nobody cared about their skill set anymore. We had an argument between the VoIP senior engineer and the old digital telephone system administrator back at a company that I was working for. And again, the nastiest thing I ever heard was the Cisco person, the VoIP person. Basically, she said when they were getting into an argument, she literally said, "Look, any of my team, I can train what the hell he does on our systems within a week or two," right? They know Cisco, they know Call Manager, they know Server 2000 back in the day. Basically, understanding hunt groups and call paths and that type of thing is relatively simple compared to understanding how Cisco works. She literally was like, "That motherfucker, that guy has no fucking clue how to do anything that we do, and he wouldn't have a clue for 6 months." And that was reality. That was real. Can you imagine being at the top of your game? You've worked your way up for the past 2 decades. You get a nice cushy job. You are king of the hill. And then you have some whippersnapper come in and basically say, "Hey, Pops, all of your skill set is essentially obsolete. So just shut the hell up." Just your arguments are annoying, right? And that's how things have gone, right? And I think this is one thing that a lot of the new coders just really don't get through their heads is when they look at the world, right? We've been in one paradigm for a while now. Again, the whole transition to server SOA, service-oriented architecture, and then even to serverless architecture. Serverless architecture is basically in the service-oriented architecture world. Basically, this world with cloud, basically cloud servers, IaaS, infrastructure as a service, being able to use code in order to interact with infrastructure as a service, right? There is this paradigm that basically got created back when AWS got spun up back in 2007, 2008, and we've had that paradigm for about the past decade or so. And so we have a tremendous number of technology professionals that came of age within this particular paradigm of technology. And with React and with a lot of the React Native and a lot of the coding tools that have been out there, they've been able to do more and more and more stuff with coding to build cooler and cooler projects. And so one of the things that becomes becomes very tempting to think is that, oh, okay, I know how to code. Coding is being a real technology professional, right? Just like, being an administrator of telephone systems, was being a real technology professional. One of the things a lot of folks don't think about, though, is again, things are changing. And one of the questions that has to be asked is, what you're doing actually as special as you think it is? One of the big problems that I've seen over the past decade is there's something called the Vision Fund. So the Vision Fund was one of the most disastrously stupid things that happened in the tech industry in probably about 100 years. Anyways, $100 billion got dumped into startup companies in order to hyperscale them really quick, right? So the idea with the Vision Fund is WeWork was funded by the Vision Fund. Uber was funded by the Vision Fund. ARM was actually purchased by the Vision Fund. All these companies, the idea was grow as big as possible, as fast as possible, and then money will get printed. Well, they spent a lot of money. They grew really big. The whole printing money thing, they hadn't really figured out, right? And so one of the interesting things is if you look at the past decade is we have a lot of technology professionals. We have a lot of coders that frankly probably shouldn't have a job in a rational world. In a rational world, they wouldn't have a job because if you look at it, so many of these startup companies fail. So many of these projects fail, and they fail on the face of it. There is nobody that actually sat there and really thought that this thing was going to be successful. People just were throwing money at these tech companies, hoping it would be the next Facebook. People did not understand Facebook when it got created. People made billions of dollars off of Facebook. And so now people think, I may not understand this, but maybe it's the next Facebook. Maybe it's the next Twitter. Maybe it's the next Google. I didn't think Google was a big deal when Google came out. And so I don't think this is a big deal. So maybe it will be a big deal. And if I invest in it, I'll make a gazillion dollars, right? And so a tremendous amount of money has been thrown into the startup world, basically on businesses. Even the investors don't really grasp the concept of. And so as we get higher interest rates, so that high net worth individuals no longer need to invest in startups in order to get an appropriate return, as we've seen the explosion of so many of these high profile startup companies that basically just turned into a complete and utter disaster. One of the things that has to be looked at is how much money is then going to start getting pulled out of the tech sector, and especially for coders in general. And so one of the questions that has to be asked is, as money starts getting pulled out of the tech sector, even the jobs that still need to be done, one of the things that tech people need to do is they need to figure out how to optimize. How can I use technology to optimize coding, right? How can you use technology to optimize communications? That's what we did in the past. How can we use technology to optimize system administration? That's what we did in the past. How do we use technology to optimize the ability to actually do the bits and bytes, latencies and bandwidth and all that kind of stuff? That's what we've done in the past. So riddle me this, riddle me this, riddle me that. Why do programmers imagine for one heartbeat that their jobs are so damn precious that they are not going to get optimized in the exact same way every other profession in the tech industry has been optimized basically since the tech industry has begun. And so this is one of those things to be thinking about. Again, before we even get to artificial intelligence, does it simply make sense that probably in the coding world, we need far more optimization, right? We need far more tools for efficiency that will probably require a lot less coders. Now, one of the things that you're going to hear, again, about the programming world, the coding world, is the doom and gloom. The doom and the gloom. The career is over. I've already heard it. I've already heard it from professional developers who are like, I would not have my kid learn programming now. The entire career is going to be gone in a decade. Oh. Yeah, if only it was that simple. If only it was that simple. If only it was that easy to get rid of Node developers. Greta AI, go attack the Node developers. Anyway, sadly, we're going to have Node developers for a lot longer. Regardless of what I say, regardless of what Greta AI does, Node developers are going to be around for a long, long time. And one of the things to be thinking about is, again, every time one of these things come up, AI or whatever else, everybody acts like it's brand new. Right? We hear about it with remote work nowadays. How much do you hear about remote work? And it's like, remote work is changing the world. And again, to some extent it has. But the funny thing is, people keep acting like remote work is new. Like, COVID created remote work. And it was like, well, no, not really. Cable internet created telecommuting. Again, right around, I don't know at this point, probably about 20 years ago. 2002 is probably when it really came into the fore. It became affordable for a lot of employees to be able to do remote work. Um, and so, yeah, we actually understand a lot about remote work. We just used to call it telecommuting. Again, one of the interesting things with telecommuting is they found, right, you hear Elon Musk talk about lazy people, lazy remote workers. And again, it depends on your company. Maybe your company has lazy remote workers. One of the most interesting things they found, though, they actually did studies of people who did telecommuting back in the day. And one of the bigger problems with telecommuting was actually burnout. That when you have people who live in the suburbs, who don't have families, who don't have communities, who don't have church groups, who don't have all of that kind of stuff, when the only thing they have is their jobs, then many times they basically don't clock out at the end of the day. They wake up in the morning and they literally are reading their work emails as they're drinking their cup of coffee. And then when it hits 5 or 6 o'clock at night, they're sitting there shoving their Stouffer's food into their gullet as they're creating spreadsheets or whatever else. One of the most interesting things they ran into is actually burnout. Burnout was a much bigger issue for telecommuters than people had realized. Again, they thought telecommuters would be lazy, and it actually wasn't the case. And there was a lot of research that was done into this, and a lot of policies that were put out there to try to keep your telecommuters from burning out. Again, the funny thing is now we have remote workers, and Eli, that's telecommuting. Eli, you don't understand. Telecommuting is not remote work. Okay, boys and girls. Anyways, one of the interesting things to be thinking about with all this is whenever any of these new things come out, they come out with a new word. They come out with a new word for it, and then they act like that new word is the most exciting thing, and it's gonna do all of this stuff, right? One of the things about Greta AI, one of the things I think about is outsourcing. Remember when outsourcing was going to destroy the American tech industry? And frankly, I would have put money on that. Again, one of the reasons I wasn't so worried about coding way back in the day, 15 years ago, is like, well, the Indians are going to do it, right? So we had this thing called Y2K. So when year 2000 came around, there was a bug in a lot of computer systems where it couldn't track when it flipped over the new millennia. And so there was a lot of coding that had to be done simply to fix these Y2K bugs. So it was boring coding that most Americans didn't want to do. It had to be done on a large scale relatively quickly. Something called ISDN lines and T1 lines had come into prominence in the late 90s. And so what a lot of tech companies realized is they could outsource all of this Y2K work over to India, where you had a workforce that could speak English, a workforce that was highly educated. And that kind of stuff. And with T1 lines, you could transmit the code back and forth and actually get things fixed. So the Indian tech industry really exploded with the growth of Y2K. And again, if you go back to the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there was this idea that in the future, by the 2020s, everything would be coded by an Indian. And again, that was good for selling newspapers. That was good for selling The Economist. You're like, oh, I'm going to spend $5 to find out why we're screwed. Well, here's the interesting thing. When they outsourced everything to India and other countries, it didn't actually work out so well. I was actually reading one Indian politician, not an American politician, whatever, Indian politician. And one of the big problems that the Indian politician was discussing was a lot of the soft skills that once they started outsourcing just a metric crap ton of work, so they had outsourced a lot of work to India, right? And so out of the pool of people, they got really good people to do the work. Well, again, scaling. We talk about scaling. The larger you do, the more you want done, the more difficult it can be to accomplish a thing, right? So as we started scaling up the outsourcing, you go from getting the creme de la creme to the creme to the chunky white things. You know what I'm saying, right? As far as quality is concerned. And so again, one of the Indian politicians was talking about this, and one of the big problems is that a lot of the Indian coders were simply not showing up to work. Right, that they had the math skills, right? They had the engineering skills, but many times that whole idea that you have to show up to work at 9 o'clock in the morning kind of simply had passed them by somehow. And again, when somebody gets sick, that they don't show up to work, and there was all of these logistical issues with simply getting a lot of the Indian staff to be able to do the coding work. Not that it was across the board. There was a lot of Indian staff that went in and did phenomenal work, but again, as you tried to scale up, up to the mass that was required, there started to become more and more issues. There also started to become communication issues. Again, not that AI will have problems with communication issues, but we're going to India, right? You go to India, cows walk down the road, people still wash their clothes in the actual rivers. It's a whole new world. It's a whole new world. You should go there. It's an interesting time. Anyways, right? They see the world a slight differently. I think about this. When I was there was a new movie. And there was like, people were shocked. People were shocked because the director like blew up a car in the movie. And they're like, oh my golly. And again, this was 2000s. Oh my golly. Like the director used a rickshaw to get around every day. Basically would pay for a rickshaw to drive him around every day. Not a limousine or anything else, a rickshaw. And yet he was willing to explode a car. And again, you come to the U.S. and you watch a movie and they're just blowing up cars left and right. Here's a car, there's a car, there's a car. Who the hell cares, right? But one of the interesting things to be thinking about is that even when things were asked for, right? Even when you use English, I talk about this, the thing of the name. When you say a word, when you say a name, do both sides agree on what that actually means? What they found out is that the communication barrier between English-speaking peoples that live entirely different types of lives was just an absolutely massive barrier. And when they started doing research, it was kind of interesting, when they started doing research, what they found out doing a lot of the projects is that the most expensive part of programming projects was actually the project management, the design, that type of thing. Designing the project, making sure things went to plan, getting things within timelines, all of that. That was actually the most expensive part of the project. Even when you're paying coders $100,000 or $200,000 a year, at the end of the day, that's actually a very small expense for that overall project. And so one of the reasons we have so many coders in the United States now, even after coding was supposed to get outsourced all those years ago, is they found it was actually a hell of a lot less expensive to pay an American coder $150,000, $200,000 a year than it was to try to hire an Indian coder for $20 a year, whatever it is that they were trying to do. And so the outsourcing revolution simply never took off the way we were expressly told. It's amazing. It's amazing when bloggers write about technology in an industry that they don't understand. They keep making proclamations that don't make half an ounce of sense. But I know what people are going to be saying. They're going to be like, but Eli, have you seen Copilot? Yes, and I've seen Copilot, and Copilot is pretty cool. So there's something called GitHub Copilot. It's part of Microsoft's AI suite, and basically you can type in, I need a JavaScript function that will do X, Y, or Z, and it will provide you a JavaScript function that will do what you ask it to do. That will probably work 99% of the time. And so one of the things people say is, look, that's the death of coding. But again, when you say that's the death of coding, again, it just kind of shows you where you are in our industry, because simply understanding how to do a function is one part of coding. It's not the overall project. Again, one of the things I talk about is architectures, right? How are you going to architect your systems? Is this going to be a cloud system? Are you going to use platform as a service? Are you going to use infrastructure as a service? Are you going to use caching? Is it going to be on the public cloud? Is it going to be in a private cloud? Is it going to be in a hybrid cloud? How are you going to be dealing with endpoints and all that kind of thing? There's a lot that goes into these projects beyond the simple basic JavaScript calls or whatever else. So one of the things to be thinking about, again, when you start looking at, oh my golly, GitHub Copilot is going to take my job, one of the questions that you should ask yourself is, why aren't you going home tonight to spend an extra half an hour to learn more? Again, it's one of those weird things we have in the tech industry. We all know that technology keeps changing. Nobody will shut up about the fact of the fact that the technology moves at such a fast speed. But then you get so many of these coders who basically, they go through their boot camp or whatever, they learn what they learn, and then they want to sit on their ass for the next 10 years or their entire careers doing basically what they learned and not actually learn new things. Or they want to learn specifically what they want to learn. Oh, I know JavaScript. I want to learn Node. Okay, I learned Node. Now I want to learn Next.js or whatever, right? They're in their little wheelhouse where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they feel smart. And so even when they are going home and taking 30 minutes to an hour every day to learn something new, they're learning it within that narrow band, that realm. And the reality is, again, if you look at someone like GitHub, GitHub can devastate that one realm. If all you know is the JavaScript languages, you don't understand architecture, you don't understand SQL, you don't understand database systems, you don't understand when I start talking about all these different kinds of clouds, you don't understand how all that works, Docker, anything else. Well, yeah, okay, Copilot can take that. But one of the things you need to be thinking about is when you are developing solutions, when you're solving problems, again, there is more to it than any one single damn component. There's a lot of things that go into it. And so if you continuously update your skills, you will be fine. Again, if you look at the Microsoft world, if you were in the sysadmin world and you've gone along with the Microsoft world, right? If you're an NT4 in the 2020s, who the hell cares? But we went from NT4, then you went to 2000 that had Active Directory, then you went to 2003, which is basically the same, upgraded. You go to 2008, there were a lot of improvements with 2008. You go to 2012, had even more improvements. Then you start going into the Azure world. Now we're getting into the world again with DevOps within Microsoft, right? If you continuously upgrade your skill sets, you will still have a job. But let me tell you, an Azure administrator in the 2020s looks nothing like a Windows NT administrator back from 2000, right? Thank God they're not worrying about BDCs and PDCs and all that horse crap anymore. They're off to more interesting things. And so that's one of the things to be thinking about is like even when they talk about Copilot or any of these AI assisted technologies, the fact of the matter is your job is to solve problems. Your job is not simply to create a function. Your job is not simply to be able to make an API or call it whatever. Your job is to solve a problem. So if you're in a large team and that team has a lot of work to do, and so therefore they give you their problem, their problem is a function, then currently your task is to do that function. But as AI is able to do more and more things, or becomes easier and easier and easier to do things, then your job becomes bigger than what it used to be. The other thing to be thinking about is there's a lot of folks out there that are saying, well, but Eli, AI is going to create its own programming. Yeah, that's going to work out well. Yay! So you're telling me you're not going to have any staff that are going to be able to audit the code that the AI has created. Yeah, that's going to go well. You know, didn't we hear that from the open source world? We heard that from the open source. Eli, the reason you need to use open source is secure. It's more secure. It's arguably maybe safer than proprietary software, maybe. But it's amazing. You have all these really smart people that design all these open source applications. They go into production environment. Again, things like bind, right? DNS. And after a decade, nobody realized that there was a screw up. And there's a really major issue with bind or BGP or any of these other things. And that was actually code that was not only written by humans, but that was open source and supposedly continually viewed by other humans as they improved it. And yet, major security vulnerabilities can last for a decade. And that's when you have people that are actually able to audit the code. Riddle me this, riddle me that. What's going to happen when startup founders start laying off their coders because AI can code it for them and they start getting that code back? Want to guess how many leaks there are going to be in that garbage ass code? Again, the whole question, encryption at rest, encryption in transit, how API keys are dealt with, just a tremendous number of things. And so even if AI is going to be writing your code, or even going to be writing large chunks of code, you still need to be able to audit it. And auditing means you actually understand what the hell is going on. So it means you can actually tap out the code yourself so that you can verify that the code is doing what the hell it's supposed to be doing and not doing additional things, not adding additional vulnerabilities. and the whole nine yards. Again, one of the things that AI can be very useful for is auditing old code, right? You have a lot of old code, you throw the old code through the AI and say, give me vulnerability, right? That is a great thing to use AI for, because then it will tell you the vulnerabilities that it sees, and then you can try to fix those vulnerabilities. But can you imagine a time when you just hand it all off to the AI, and then the AI just returns something, and you throw that into a production environment, and all hell is going to break loose. So, again, will we need fewer coders? If somebody understands what a loop is, if somebody understands what a call is, if somebody understands how to do asynchronous stuff and functions and all that kind of stuff within programming. Again, one of the big problems you get to with programming is you know what you want to do, but then you just forget the syntax. Right, so okay, I know PHP, and so basically what I want to do is what I do in PHP, but I just need to do it in Python. And you're like, I need to do a for each. So it's like, I know I need to do a for each loop to iterate through these results. And then you go to Python, and Python doesn't have for each loops, it has for X loop, for loops basically. It's slightly different. And so you got to figure out how to do a for loop in Python. You know what you want to do, you just don't know the language. Again, if else, right? Okay, I need to do an if else statement, or an if else statement. And then you go to Python and it's an if else statement. I know what I want to do. I literally know what I want to do. I just don't know the syntax. I don't know the specific words. So yes, is one good coder going to be able to do a lot more? Yes. You're still going to need a coder in order to do that. And then some of the other things to be thinking about is then what other tasks can basically be assigned to other people in order to build out a project better. Again, as system administration became easier and easier and easier, more and more people started focusing on development, that type of thing. One of the things to be considering is, as coders are able to do more because they have this AI assistance, what are the additional solutions your projects can try to solve problems for, or how can you build things out better? Again, one of the things to be thinking about is resources, right? You can only build based off of the resources you have. Eli, can you solve this problem for me? How much money you got? How much money you got? How much resources? I can solve any. You got $1 trillion, I can solve all your problems. All your problems. You got $100, I don't know, I can run antivirus, right? Again, it's resources. Like a lot of things, a lot of the tech professionals don't want to think about is the problems you're able to solve for is going to be how much money your company has, how much resources your company has. And so you see a lot of kind of crappy applications out there. You see a lot of crappy solutions, not necessarily because the company wanted to put out a crappy solution, just because they ran out of resources. We're going to run this until we run out of money, and then we're going to ship the product, right? If you start having coders and your tech staff be able to do more and more and more, that actually many times can push out a much better product at the end of the day, because now your money is going to be able to go further. And so these are some of the things to be thinking about, again, with this whole idea that AI is going to destroy coding jobs. So there you go. Surprise, surprise, surprise. In this after-school program where I was talking about will AI destroy coding jobs, I actually didn't talk a lot about AI. Because as I will try to tell all the noobs out there, these words, oh, they come and go. They come and go. We had telecommuting for 20 years. We had the research behind telecommuting. We had the management styles behind telecommuting. We had telecommuting for 2 decades. And then all of a sudden, remote work is the big buzzword. Basically, it's just telecommuting at scale, and frankly, we're running into, with remote work, we're running into the exact same damn problems we figured out that we had, 10 years ago with telecommuting. Again, it was interesting. IBM, again, you go back to about 2010, I was at one of the interops, and IBM was talking about how they were going to push everybody to telecommuting. Because again, telecommuting was actually better for IBM, right? If you have a cubicle, that cubicle has to have HVAC. You have to rent the cubicle. You have to pay the HVAC for the cubicle. You have to have the parking. You have to pay the taxes. It costs a lot. It costs a lot of money simply to have a cube to shove somebody into. And so one of the things I realized with telecommuting, they're like, wow, we're going to have 100,000 telecommuters. Everybody is going to be doing telecommuting. That's what they declared. They declared that back in like 2010. Yeah, it didn't really work out that way. Surprise. Because yes, you do save a lot on utility bills, and then there's a lot more issues that go along with it. Again, when you start looking at AI. Again, we've had outsourcing, and we've had outsourcing again since the Y2K bugs. And it's interesting. Outsourcing did not work out literally how we were told outsourcing was going to work out. We were told very specifically that outsourcing was going to destroy the coding career in the United States, right? Past 2005, anybody who's a coder in the United States, there's an expiration date on your job. And then, surprise, we go into the 2020s and we still have 22-year-olds making $250,000 a year plus equity stake, right? Because the reality is it doesn't quite work out how you think it is. And so again, when we start talking about this thing, will AI or will anything else, one of the things that I would argue is just look into the past and see how the past has worked out. Are there concerns for coders, right? If you are a coder right now and you really like that really high salary, doing Node.js, are there concerns on the horizon? Yes, AI is one of your concerns, right? It is an additional piece of functionality that makes your job easier. Just like VS Code. I mean, VS Code is amazing. Again, you go back 10 years ago, there are all these different IDEs out there. Most of them were pretty half-assed. Trying to code in the IDEs was a complete pain in the ass. And now you have VS Code that's free. Again, nobody talks about that. How many jobs has VS Code destroyed? What do you mean? Well, think about it, right? I've got IntelliSense, I've got the debugging tools, right? VS Code makes coding so much easier and so much more accessible than things were, again, 10 years ago. Nobody talks about VS Code taking people's jobs because that, for some reason, AI taking your job is obvious. VS Code taking your job is stupid on the face of it, right? One of the things to be thinking about, though, is, again, if you're worried about your career, is looking at it. Is your company using systems to make things as efficient as possible? As Ansible was able to allow sysadmins to administer thousands of systems at a time, are there things within your infrastructure where if they deployed relatively simple solutions that you can actually get far more productivity out of individual employees? Something to think about. Again, IT staff, for a lot of time, we had bloated IT staff, right? Companies hired way too many IT people. The world changed. You didn't need as many IT people, but a lot of these companies have bloated IT staff, not because they needed them, but because they thought they might need them in the future. And then after a while, they all got laid off. Again, that's one of the things to think about with your company, right? Again, with the Vision Fund. With the idiocy of 0% interest rates for over a decade. One of the things to do is look around your company and ask, again, is your company bloated? Is your company bloated? Are you solving problems for your company? That's what they say is whenever there's a recession or whatever, you always want to be the plumber, right? Because companies need to make sure poop goes down the toilet. They can get rid of secretaries, right? They can get rid of secretaries. They can get rid of middle managers. They can get rid of HR people. But you know what? When the CEO takes a dump, the poop better go down the toilet. Right? So one of the things to be thinking about, again, if you're worried about recession, you're worried about your job, right? Are you doing the plumbing for your company? If you left, would communication still work? Would replication strategy still work? Would whatever configurations you have still work? Are you doing something that's actually valuable for the company? Because you should be far more worried. You should be far more worried about 8% interest rates than AI. 8% interest rates is what's going to kill your job long before AI does. But, that's just me. That's just me and another rambling ramble. So after this, I'm going to teach a class on Python. How to, what's it called? Sterilize? Anyway, sterilize strings. Clean out all the garbage data in strings. Got to do that class. AI could do that. I trust AI to do that. That's one thing I like with AI. You know what AI is good for is regex. So good for regex. It's like I need a regex, whatever, for what I'm looking for. Let's plug that into ChatGPT. ChatGPT, I'm using Python. I need a regex formula to be able to pull out this type of information. And it's like, here you are. I'm like, thank you. But here's the thing. Think about that, right? Look, oh, AI is going to take your job. But I need to know that I need to use Python. I'm using Python. I need to know that. I need to know the basics of Python. I need to know that I need regex, right? What is a regular expression? Does everybody know what a regular expression is, right? I need to know that. I need to know what kind of data I'm pulling out. I need to know why I'm pulling out that data. I need to know what I'm going to do. Once I have that regex, what am I going to do with that data once I've pulled it out? This is everything that goes into solving a problem that goes beyond the basic functionality that AI is going to give you. So anyways, there you go. There's some ponderings for you. As always, I enjoy doing these types of videos and look forward to seeing you in the next one.